Noon here on Christmas Eve, and welcome to another supplemental edition of the OBX Wave Report, where we explore all things waves, weather, climate, beach lifestyle, water sports, and surfing. And in this case, in our climate subsection, we're going to talk about clean energy. We're going to talk about clean energy as a necessary response to the climate crisis to preserve our beautiful coastlines for ourselves and for our future. It is Christmas Eve, and I thought that this would be the perfect time, really, to talk about our responsibility to both ourselves and to our fellow human beings and to the world around us. Because, well, in a way, it's kind of a counter trend because, I mean, at Christmas, many of us get wrapped up in this kind of magical feeling, which in and of itself can be very nice. It's very comforting. It's wonderful to enjoy fellowship with friends and family, but if we get too focused in on, just things that are, for us, then we don't do all the things that we need to do to, not only take care of ourselves, but take care of our fellows, take care of our communities, take care of our wonderful national health of our democracy and a government, the government of we the people and other governments of we the people around the world, and of the global community that we all share. And so for today, what I am going to do is I'm going to try and put this. I know I've talked about it before because it was big news earlier on in December when the national laboratories at Lawrence Livermore produced a net positive energy nuclear fusion reaction, which was indeed a major scientific breakthrough. And since that time, there's been a lot of expert talk and discussion that helps us kind of get an understanding, get to grips with what this means for us as human beings, as a species, and as we confront the climate crisis. And I've got some good, I believe, facts and figures for you guys to look at, in addition to some excellent quotes from some of the leaders in climate and in the science involving clean energy. And so what we're going to do is look at this breakthrough, which though it is a laboratory breakthrough, is likely still many years or possibly decades away from becoming a practical response to climate crisis. And to try and put that into context, because oftentimes when we have like breakthroughs like these or news of breakthroughs like this particular event, and it is a major achievement, you get sometimes people feeling a little um, lackadaisical. You think that, oh, well, everything's just going to be fine. We don't really need to forge on ahead with all the efforts that we are presently making. And in all honesty, right now, even though that we are seeing gains in research and we are seeing, in my opinion, an increased need for funding for clean energy sources from new systems like the potential for fusion and increased need for more research in that area, we have a concordant and possibly even more keen need to fund the present energy systems that are leading the clean energy revolution, like wind, water, solar, electric vehicles, connected grids, efficiency, and all of the things that we need to do to draw down carbon from the atmosphere as well. And the reason for that is we're in the crunch time right now, and we don't have decades or even really years to wait for a new potential energy source to come online. So we're in a situation where there are really no silver bullets to the problem that we are facing at present, and they're unlikely to be. But we have all of these many solutions available that we're capable of deploying now, and these are good solutions, and it is absolutely necessary to deploy these solutions now rather than wait and kick the can down the road. Because kicking down the can down the road has already gotten us into a lot of trouble, and we have not been very responsible for both the present generation and particularly for the future generation when it comes to pursuing clean energy with the vigor that we really need to. And so I'm just going to go through some headlines as well as some quotes from some experts. So this particular headline is from an article written by Molly Glick over at Inverse. Physicists achieve a holy grail of nuclear fusion with a long road ahead. Um, and I'm just going to say that this is it is kind of a holy grail to get a net positive energy return on a fusion reaction, but the net positive was relatively low. The amount of energy that went into it was very high, and and the kind of technology that is being used for this right now is still very clunky. So there's a lot of progress that needs to be made on the accuracy and efficiency of lasers, for example, for this ignition fusion type technology when you're powering up these massive lasers. And this particular laser, I believe, is the size of like 3 football fields in length. Aims like it's not just one laser; it's like 92 lasers, 100. I'm sorry, 192 of the most powerful lasers in the world, aimed at this little target the size of about a thimble, to achieve a fusion reaction that lasts for you know very small fractions of a second, and then boom produces energy, but then the methodologies for actually harnessing that energy are also not really there yet either. So still in a very infantile stage, in a kind of laboratory stage. People have compared it to the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, when the need is to get people to the moon. So that's kind of the gap in what has been achieved now that is a major achievement, and and what needs to be achieved to actually make this a viable part of the clean energy system that we are even now building. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the thing where I try to help put things into context for you guys. So what I'm going to do here is look at some statistics from IRENA, which is a organization that tracks the growth of renewables and targets what needs to be done. One of the many organizations that targets what needs to be done in order to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target to help prevent the worst effects of climate change. And so right now we do see massive growth in renewable energy systems. So right now in 2021, this is as of last year, the total global um, production of clean energy is in the range of 3,000 or 3 terawatts. And this, I'm sorry, this is the generating capacity of renewable energy. And the number of people employed globally for renewable energy is 12.7 million. So it's a very large sector. I believe it represents about 26% of all energy generation, and it's growing rapidly. But it needs to grow even more rapidly to meet the climate goals that we need. So we need to double down on the viable clean energy systems that we already have that are proven and that are a massive industry already and a massive industry for sustainability. And one third statistic to look at is cost. So one of the key viability factors for clean energy is the actual cost to produce various energy sources. And the cost per kilowatt hour for photovoltaics has rapidly fallen to right now around 48 cents per kilowatt hour. For offshore wind, the price for per kilowatt hour of offshore wind has also declined considerably to 75 cents per kilowatt, I believe 75, or is that 0.75? I'm sorry. this looks like, yeah. So 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, 4.8 cents for offshore wind, 4.8 cents per kilowatt hour for Um, yep, that makes sense for solar energy, and this is production costs, and 3.3 cents per kilowatt hour for onshore wind power. So all of these are actually very inexpensive sources of energy that outcompete traditional fossil fuels when it comes to cost. So already we have amazingly viable clean energy systems. There are other challenges to clean energy, but from a cost standpoint, that is not one of them. And presently, many of the other challenges are already being overcome as we continue to work with clean energy and integrate them into grids and start to learn how to use clean energy systems more effectively. And also as battery technologies improve and we have other options for managing the intermittency of clean energy, which has always been one of those things that clean energy critics have honed in on. At present, according to the experts, we can easily get to 80% of global energy provided by clean energy sources. In my opinion, I don't think that it would be as difficult as many of the critics are saying to get to 100% clean energy, even from the sources that we have at present and the technological learning curves that we have at present. So, in my opinion, what we need to do is perform a kind of all of the above strategy where we pursue the existing clean energy mass deployment now as rapidly as possible, and we fund the research for clean energy systems like hydrogen fusion, which we are starting to see breakthroughs now. So, what are our prospects for doing that? And so, right now, the pathway, the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway for the rapid deployment is available through 2030. And here's a chart that shows what can be done according to ARENA as far as renewable energy mass deployment and a rapid phase out of coal power, and likely subsequent phasing out of vehicular fossil fuels in the form of oil and also phasing out of gas over a longer time period, but particularly targeting in on coal and then rapidly moving on to phasing out gas and oil in energy systems. So that's what it looks like based on what we have now: wind, water, solar, and biofuels. Um, and then we can start talking about perhaps further down the road, and it's debatable how much further down the road, we can start integrating viable fusion into our energy systems. And when it comes to these energy systems for fusion, we have the optimist and we have more skeptical sources. And I'm going to try and provide you with a range of optimistic expectations and skeptical expectations for fusion. But I do want to underline the fact that we really do need to focus on the mass deployment of the viable clean energy sources that we have today. And then, but also do our best to accelerate the research for things like hydrogen fusion. So right now, the Biden administration, which I would label as a optimist when it comes to fusion energy, believes that we can have viable fusion power in a single commercial reactor by 2032. This is not deployment at scale. This is just like, hey, we've got everything together. The research has proved viable. It's commercially viable, and we get our first fusion reactor out there by 2032. And that would probably, in my opinion, be like the most optimistic everything goes right scenario. And in some cases, like that, I don't know. That seems crazy to me to actually get something out there like that by the 2032 timeframe. But the Biden administration thinks it's possible, or at least possible in the sense that that's the goal we should shoot for. And and I think that there's a lot to be said for that particular potential. Um, we've got right now we have an X level of funding, which is probably insufficient for fusion. And if we get more funding for that research, that energy kind of research, then the timelines will tend to accelerate. So the Biden administration putting out this very aggressive timeline does put a marker down and hopefully adds confidence to investors who want to start to invest in working through that research and getting to a state where we can start deploying fusion by the 2030s or 2040s. According to this article by Bloomberg, it's likely to take much longer, and I tend to agree with it. The deployment for these new technologies tends to run into a lot of hitches, but who knows? I mean, if you don't know until you make the effort. And what I found is that when it comes to clean energy, the pessimists have also tended to be wrong. The folks who have been overly optimistic tend to be wrong, and the folks that are overly pessimistic tend to be wrong. And what tends to happen is things tend to run in um, at about the mid range. And the one driver that tends to most determine acceleration is how much interest and investment there is. And since there's such a need for clean energy deployment, absolutely please do invest in this research. But also, don't consider that research to be the silver bullet, the one thing that's going to fix everything. We also need to have the significant investment scaling up for the rapid clean energy deployment that we need now. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more with some expert comment. There's, in my opinion, a perfect quote from Bill McKibben that, in my opinion, kind of ties that all together. So I just wanted to show you this other headline from the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is a fantastic research organization for all things energy, and they're also a good advocacy group for nuclear non-proliferation. And there fusion in and of itself is an issue that is tied into uh, nuclear weapons, and so there is that concern as well, and it's one that is worth addressing. Although it is also worth noting that the United States, as a democracy, um, does encounter a greater level of global threat from autocracies these days than historically, in my opinion. And so we shouldn't um, deflate or denigrate the need for our stature as a strong power for the defense of democracies around the world, even though we also should recognize the ideal and the goal to remove the specter of nuclear annihilation from the earth. But we can't, I don't think, do it from a position of compromise with authoritarian powers that do not compromise, that just seek to take and take and take. But this article from the Union of Concerned Scientists does, by Dylan Spalding, does provide some excellent context on, I guess, like a more skeptical view of what may occur as a result of this breakthrough. I believe that Dylan's talking more about a multi-decade time frame for the likely viability of fusion-based energy systems. And that might also be a more realistic assessment. I am not a fusion expert. I encourage you to read both Dylan and Bloomberg and make your own analysis and assessments based on these expert opinions. But this is a fantastic article by Dylan, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And it does take into account a more multi-decadal time frame for fusion viability, even taking into context the fact that we have had a major breakthrough at this time. So putting things into context, one of my favorite contextualizers when it comes to climate and clean energy is Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, and I think this quote from Twitter is an excellent uh, encapsulation of the of this the of our present event here and our present position um, in the context of climate change and our deployment of clean energy and looking at potential breakthroughs in the future. And I'm just going to read the quote directly. Dr. Hayhoe says, getting a lot of questions about what today's nuclear fusion breakthrough means for climate. My answer is not much. We already have the technologies we need to decarbonize 80% of the electricity sector by 2030, even as demand soars due to electrification. And so and Dr. Hayhoe joins with other scientists like Dr. Michael Mann in pushing mass deployment of clean energy now. And I think this quote does provide some excellent context. Right now, the research breakthrough doesn't in fusion doesn't produce any viable energy source for civilization. So our main goal should be mass deployment. And I think this quote right here does point to what needs to be done now. We've got viable energy sources now that we need to mass deploy. And I agree with Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, and I encourage you to follow her over on Twitter and all of her other social media places. She's a fantastic educator on climate and clean energy. And for a final comment, I'd also like to pull up I like to pull up Bill McKibben, who's one of my favorite climate activists, and I'm just going to pull this quote for you from Bill McKibben. Here we go. Sorry, and in this, so he wrote an article in the New Yorker on December 12th. So he really got ahead of the curve on this. And Bill McKibben says, imagine if everything goes right, a world where in a quarter century's time, we can take down the solar panels and the wind turbines we're now erecting and replace them with elegant fusion reactors. Um, if we don't make that first transition right now, these elegant reactors will be deployed, if at all, on a badly degraded, even broken planet. And I think between Catherine Hayhoe and Bill McKibben, I think we have our context. Fusion isn't ready for mass deployment now. We've got a nice breakthrough, but if we put all our eggs in the fusion basket, what ends up happening is the climate crisis accelerates and we get smashed by it. And we get many of the impacts that are very harmful. And those like me who live on the coastline, well, we don't end up with communities anymore in the medium to long term by mid-century and later because sea level rise tends to accelerate and the storms tend to worsen. And as the carbon pollution intensifies the climate crisis. So what we need to do right now is move on move on with a serious mission to mass deploy that clean energy that we have right now. And perhaps as we get into the next decade or two, or maybe three, we start to get these nice fusion reactors that can help us fill whatever gaps that appear in this mass clean energy deployment. And if they end up becoming a more viable energy source than the already very inexpensive wind, water, and solar forms of clean energy, then they can outcompete wind, water, and solar, and we can have an even more helpful overall base energy system for global civilization. But I think that it is worthwhile now to say, hey, we're at a moment where we need to act. We've got to fight the climate crisis with the army that we have, and the army that we have right now on the ground is solar panels, wind turbines, hydro plants, um, you know, various forms of bio energy, and we have various forms of carbon drawdown, and we've got the various breakthroughs in battery technology that we have seen thus far. And this army itself is not a bad army. It may not be the perfect imaginary army that we imagined in our Christmas holiday dreams, but it is still a good army. And we can beat the climate crisis with it. And if we, as we beat back the climate crisis, we get these better technologies that come along, then great. So So a nice supplement to the OBX wave report, pulling in various sources, various expert sources to help provide some context for you on the recent breakthrough in in fusion energy, excuse me, and also provide you with a little bit more of a, hopefully more of a sense of urgency to get done what we need to get done to support the expert organizations and the advocate groups and the groups that are mass deploying the clean energy, as well as providing for the research that we need to even improve as we go, because we've got to do it all. It's in it's an all hands on deck, all of the above, all the things. We got to do it, drive on with the mission kind of scenario, because we've got a future to save. So thank you for joining me again, and please remember to help do everything you can to help save our beautiful coastlines, and also all the various wonderful natural systems that provide so many services to all of us who live here today on this earth.